Welcome to Chain Reaction, the Foreign Policy Research Institute's flagship network of podcast series examining the political, security, economic, and social trends shaping Europe and Eurasia. Throughout the year, we're talking with experts about developments in Russia's war in Ukraine, the new European security order, the past, present, and future of the Baltic states, Russia's political economy, and great power competition in the region. Join us each month for
Bear Market Brief,
Baltic Ways,
Report in Short,
The Continent,
and of course, our flagship, Chain Reaction. New episodes are available each week on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. This week on The Continent.
I know. By most definitions, Kazakhstan is not in Europe, but I'm going to need you to bear with me on this one. I'm Aaron Schwartzbaum, and this is The Continent, a podcast that, at least normally, is about Europe and how the war in Ukraine is impacting its politics, society, and security. Each episode, I visit, in quotes, a new country to learn from local and regional experts. So what gives with Kazakhstan? Well, that's a fair question, so allow me to explain. I was excited to do this episode because I think there's value in a comparative study. Like many of the Eastern European countries we visited together were not so long ago, Kazakhstan is under Russia's influence. It's just the political reality of the situation. Russia exerts gravity, and as a result, Kazakhstan's leaders need to contend with that gravity, mitigate it, bounce against it, go along with it. Plus, there are some really interesting geopolitical trends in the region that I think warrant some attention. Joining to help me make sense of all of this is Temur Umarov. Temur is a fellow at the Carnegie Russia-Eurasia Center, and his research is focused on Central Asian countries' domestic and foreign policies, as well as China's relations with Russia and Central Asian neighbors. A native of Uzbekistan, Temur has degrees in China Studies and International Relations from the Russian Presidential Academy of National Economy and Public Administration and the Moscow State Institute of International Relations, otherwise known as MGIMO. He's got great credentials for this. I learned a lot in our conversation, and I hope you enjoy. This is KZ Right Now. Temur, great to have you with us today.
Hi, Aaron. Thank you for having me.
So let's start with a quick introduction of yourself. What are your research interests? What's your affiliation? What's keeping you busy?
So I'm Temur Umarov. I'm originally from Uzbekistan, Samarkand, but right now I'm based in Berlin, where I'm a fellow at Carnegie Russia-Eurasia Center. It's a department of Carnegie that we opened this April. Here I follow basically everything that happens in Central Asia, both domestically and with the region's affairs with China, Russia, and other parts of the world. But my specific interest is focused on the transition of power inside Central Asian authoritarian regimes and also growth of China's presence in the region.
That's perfect because we are going to be talking about both of those things today. I'm very excited for this episode. So I think first, let's set the stage pre-Ukraine Kazakh politics here. What happened in the transition away from Nazarbayev, who was kind of one of the big three with Putin and Lukashenko had been in there a long time? I remember reading it didn't go as he planned.
So if we go back to 2019, that was the year when the first president of independent Kazakhstan, Nursultan Nazarbayev, announced the transition of power. For him, it was something that he didn't want it to do, as many other autocrats around the world, because the main goal of any authoritarian regime is to keep running as long as possible. So unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, life isn't like that, and no one is, here forever. That's why Nazarbayev, after he saw how 3 years before that in Uzbekistan, the neighboring country, this country's first president, Islam Karimov, died while he was a president, and the country went through a transition of power, and Karimov's family went through a lot of problems, and his daughter is still in jail. Nazarbayev thought that he doesn't want to do the same. That's why he started the transition of power, and he picked Kassym-Jomart Tokayev, the current president of Kazakhstan, He picked him for a number of reasons, but the main reason was that he was not part of the political group of elite that was affiliated with Nazarbayev's family. Tokayev was a person from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and he was seen as someone who doesn't have these ambitions to grab the power inside of the regime. So for a couple of years, they were ruling the country together. Nazarbayev held a very important position of the head of the Security Council of Kazakhstan, while Tokayev was the official president. And for a couple of years, it worked. But with years, the part of the elites inside Kazakhstan who thought that they are losing out of this new scheme of power distribution, they decided that they need to do something to kind of get to the top of this pyramid, of the top of this hierarchy. And fairly speaking, this was a family of Nazarbayev, because those people, the only way to the power, the only access to the power that they have is through Nazarbayev's persona. And if Nazarbayev is becoming less and less powerful inside the system, it means that this whole family becomes less and less powerful. That's why when in January 2022, a massive protest broke up in southern parts of Kazakhstan and very quickly were supported by other big cities of Kazakhstan, specifically Almaty, the Nazarbayev family used this as an opportunity to, if not overthrow Tokayev's regime, but to make Tokayev look weak and make him look as a politician that doesn't have a total control over the country. So we have this very short period attempt of a coup, but Tokayev turned out to be a very great politician and a diplomat. He went to Vladimir Putin and asked the CSTO, Collective Security Treaty Organization. This is a Russia-led military alliance, and Kazakhstan is a part of it. So Tokayev asked CSTO to step in and to send peacekeepers to Kazakhstan, which Putin agreed to do. And it was a clear sign that Moscow is on the side of Tokayev, and it actually helped Kazakhstan and Tokayev specifically to stabilize the situation. And since then, Tokayev managed to consolidate all the power that was previously distributed evenly between him and the first president. And since 2022, I would say the transition of power has come to an end. And now we have a real president who has both official and unofficial power over the system.
So, my question is, with the caveat on this podcast, we don't engage in criminology. We don't know what's inside Putin's head. But I have to notice that he is also an aging Eurasian autocrat who may be thinking, if not now, down the road about transitioning power. Do you think there's a lesson for him in all of this? Is this something you think might worry him?
From the very beginning, when Nazarbayev started this transition of power, there were a lot of analysis whether or not Putin will follow Kazakhstan's example, because fairly speaking, this is a good strategy to start this very fragile and unpredictable process while you're still not too old and you still have some energy to control the parts of the system and the people whom you appointed, etc. But it appeared even before January 2022 that Putin is not going to do the same, that is not going to follow Nazarbayev's lead. In the eyes of Vladimir Putin, as experts on Russia write, the way Nazarbayev decided to deal with the situation is kind of cheating and is a sign of a weak leader. So, especially after January 2022, I think Vladimir Putin completely closed Kazakhstan's example as a lesson of following what Nazarbayev has done, because what happened showed that it didn't work the way Nazarbayev wanted it to work, and in the end of the day, Nazarbayev right now is just an retired old man who doesn't have a control over the system, and this is not a future that Vladimir Putin wants for himself, presumably.
So we've spent some time this episode so far talking about January 2022. Let's fast forward 1 month to events that began in February 2022, Russia's latest invasion of Ukraine. To date, and maybe there's been some changes, but you can enlighten me, how has Kazakhstan positioned itself with regards to the war?
So when the war started, Kazakhstan found itself in a very uncomfortable position. On the one hand, Kazakhstan is very closely associated with Russia. It has a long border with Russia. Its economy depends a lot on trade with Russia. It's part of Eurasian Economic Union, which is a Russia-led trade and customs regime. And on the other hand, Kazakhstan, from all 5 Central Asian countries, is the only one that has a massive international presence in its economy. Just take a look at, for example, oil sector, and you will see that there are American, European companies that produce the majority of the oil in the country, and Kazakhstan cannot survive without connection to the global West. And because of that, Kazakhstan had to stay as neutral as possible and to do just enough not to fall under secondary sanctions on the one hand, and on the other hand, to do just enough not to look as another anti-Russia in the eyes of the Kremlin. And it's very difficult and challenging position that Kazakhstan found itself, and that's why from the very beginning we hear different rhetoric from Kazakhstan about the war in Ukraine. On the one hand, you see how Tokayev is, saying out loud in the presence of Vladimir Putin that Kazakhstan is going to follow the sanction regime, that Kazakhstan is not going to become this window for Russia to the open and free world, that Kazakhstan doesn't recognize Donetsk, Lugansk, and other regions as a part of Russia. And on the other hand, you see how President Tokayev is meeting with Vladimir Putin every now and then. Almost every 3 weeks, they have a phone call or a video call or a personal meeting, even during a very toxic events like the military parade on May 9th, on Victory Day, that Russia hosts every year. Tokayev also was there. And during some other summits, Tokayev has introduced different ideas about preserving the Russian language across post-Soviet countries. So it kind of looks contradictory, but in the end of the day, this is the only way Kazakhstan can survive in this very harsh atmosphere that it found itself with the war in Ukraine.
So, speaking of toxic events and I guess Russian nationalism being the trend there, as well as preserving the Russian language, I remember learning back when that there's a fairly sizable Russian minority, particularly in northern Kazakhstan. And I think what we're seeing now is, I don't know if irredentism is the right word, although maybe it is. Russia's certainly hoping to pull ethnic Russians, or at least in Ukraine, back into the fold. I'm just wondering, in your view, is Russia a threat to Kazakhstan?
If you would have asked me this question before the invasion, I would have said no, I think. But now I'm not so sure. Because, what Russia is doing in Ukraine, it's not just another, example of how Russia is attacking its neighbors. It's already a trend that every couple of years, Russia is starting another, aggressive war against its neighbor. And in this regard, there were a lot of Russian politicians who were speaking about the northern Kazakhstan the same way as they're speaking about Ukraine, as they were speaking about Georgia in 2008. And even if you speak to some of the statements that Vladimir Putin himself made, you can hear or maybe think that Vladimir Putin also believes that Kazakhstan never had its own statehood and that it was created by Lenin or whoever he thinks is behind this whole kind of theory in the head of Vladimir Putin. But and saying all that, for Kazakhstan, it's what's happening in Ukraine. It's very sensitive topic, and this is a topic that raises a lot of nerves. And at the same time, we should also understand that what Kazakhstan's government is doing in its Russia policy is very much different from what Georgia or Ukraine have been doing throughout the years. Kazakhstan's foreign policy towards Russia, as some of the people with whom I talked in the Kazakh MFA used to tell me, is that they want to have relationship with Russia to the same level as Canada has with the US. So for them, it's not a question that they have to be on friendly terms with Moscow because there are so many dependencies and so many different spheres where Russia is dominant in a country that you don't have any other option. And while doing that, Kazakhstan also tries to be, in friendly terms with every other country that is interested in its presence in Central Asia or in Kazakhstan specifically. And most importantly, what differs Kazakhstan from Ukraine and Georgia is that the political regime in Kazakhstan is the one that is very similar to Russian one. In Kazakhstan, we also have an authoritarian regime that was in the very beginning inherited by Soviet apparatchiks, those people who, during Soviet times were the part of the Communist Party branch in Kazakh Republic. And they have strong connections with Russian political elites, and they've known each other for years. They have a lot of informal ties with each other, and they are making sure that on the surface of political sphere in Kazakhstan, there will be no one who will be criticizing Russia or no one who will be coming up with the nationalistic agenda. This is very, important for Kazakhstan's Russia policy, and this is something that both Nazarbayev and Tokayev right now are doing.
So, one quick question about policy towards Russia. We'll get into the China question, which I'm very excited to discuss. We also have the word of the day coming up. But you talked about policy towards Russia and avoiding nationalism, trying to play nice. At the same time, as far as I'm aware, there are a good number of Russians who fled the war, because we talk about refugees and displacement on this podcast. Russians fled the war into Kazakhstan. What has been the policy towards them?
Yes, it's an unprecedented. First of all, we should say that because normally Central Asian countries are those countries that send migrants to other parts of the world. And in September last year, it was the first time they had to host a lot of migrants. And by a lot, I mean really big numbers. During the peak of migration from Russia to Kazakhstan, the number of people who crossed the border amounted to 1 million of people. So, of course, they did not stay in Kazakhstan, and many went back home. Many continued their way to other Central Asian, South Caucasus, European states. But Kazakhstan was there as the main kind of gateway. Kazakhstan's government was welcoming all migrants from the very beginning. It was a very clear message that the government has sent in the very beginning when, for example, in some cities there was not enough hotels and accommodation for migrants. Some local governments even opened up public spaces for migrants to live there for a while. And immediately from the day one, Kazakhstan has opened a couple of additional government service offices around the country that allowed Russians to get the tax registration, which is important to have in Kazakhstan very quickly, so that they can open bank accounts, which will allow them to kind of withdraw their money from Russian bank accounts. So this was happening very quickly, and the government was proactive in this regard. But at the same time, we should understand that Kazakhstan didn't, have an experience of working with people who are seeking political asylum, or who are kind of create problems for Kazakhstan's own national security, because there were several examples of the people who have been, followed by Russian law enforcement, and Kazakhstan was kind of between two fires. On the one hand, it wants to welcome migrants. On the other, it doesn't want to have problems with the Russian government. So those cases were, of course, something that was a challenge for Kazakhstan. But overall, from all five Central Asian countries, I think Kazakhstan was one of the most welcoming ones.
Let's turn to the word of the day. Now, you're from Uzbekistan, but you told me you did some homework, which I deeply appreciate. Asked some Kazakh friends for the right word to describe politics, society, relevant word here. You actually came with three, but pick one. What would your favorite word on the list you found be?
Oh, yeah. So it's true. I'm not from Kazakhstan, I'm from Uzbekistan, and although our languages are similar in a way, but they're the part of one Turkic family languages, but still they're different. That's why I asked a couple of my friends, and I would say that my favorite word would be oyan, which means wake up. And we should understand that for people in Kazakhstan, behind this word, there is a clear political message, because in 2019, when the transition of power happened and Tokayev was someone like, who Nazarbayev picked as the next president, the young generation of Kazakhstan started to protest en masse in almost all big cities of Kazakhstan, and among them, they organized this political movement, which is Oyan Kazakhstan, meaning Kazakhstan, wake up. And since then, it became this, very clear message for young Kazakhstanis not to sit and wait till the leadership of the country will choose what will be the future of your own and of the political system as a whole, but to be proactive and to act. I would say that would be my favorite word. And in my view, this word really tells a lot about the current mood in the Kazakh society, at least when we speak about young Kazakhs.
Thank you for sharing. So, I like to bounce some of the narratives I hear when I'm in Washington, D.C., off of guests. And the one I hear about Central Asia with a fair bit of frequency is that the war in Ukraine for Russia has been a geopolitical catastrophe. And this is the end of Russia's kind of reign influence in its region. China is now definitively going to knock Russia out of Central Asia and maybe the South Caucasus too. To what extent has China made inroads and gained influence in Central Asia? What does that look like on a high level?
I want to start by saying that all of those scenarios and all of those opinions about China replacing Russia, I don't agree with them, not because China will not replace Russia, or China will not become more influential in Central Asia than Russia. I don't agree with them because it's wrong understanding of the region in the very beginning. When people say that one country is replacing another, they kind of talk about Central Asia as an object in international relations, as if it is a territory, or I don't know, a pie that different countries are dividing with each other. But it's not. It actually has its own body, its own leadership, its own society. And after 3 decades of being independent actors in international relations, they are actually showing proofs that they are agents of their own, future. That's why if we think of Central Asia from this point of view, I think we will understand that for Central Asia, it's foolish to replace one country by another one. For Central Asia, the key to prosperous future, to the extent it's possible in Central Asia, is to have as many partners around the world as possible. And here, both Russia and China are important for Central Asia because you don't want to be dependent too much on Russia. You don't want to be dependent too much on China. You don't want to be dependent too much on, the West. And that's why you just have to have good, friendly relations with all of them at the same time. And this is what Central Asia is trying to do. And of course, China's growth and the much bigger presence of China is a trend that we've been observing for decades already, and it's not going to disappear. China is continuing playing a very important part in the region, but it doesn't mean that overnight or in 5-10 years from now it will replace Russia. It's just wrong thinking about what region wants.
I think that's really healthy and helpful kind of reminder that yes, countries have agency. Ukraine too, turns out. But I remember seeing a lot of think tank reports in DC and a lot of pictures of chess pieces when Central Asia comes up. Very kind of a meme in the space.
Yeah.
I guess as a quick follow-up, after which we can wrap up, is so we talked about Central Asia's interests and how it sees this, competition or replacement. How does Russia see it?
I think the current Russia, Russia led by Vladimir Putin, sees Central Asia as a territory that used to be a part of the world where Russia is 100% dominant. And what Vladimir Putin wants to see in the future of the region is to see all of those 5 countries to be complete allies of Russia. And, this is something that Vladimir Putin is doing in many other parts of the world. He tries to stop the time and tries to, conserve and preserve everything in Central Asia as he remembers it during his maybe youth or when he was younger, and it kind of worked for Russia, and now his main kind of goal of those years that he will be able to do anything in Russia, I think, to keep Russia's presence to the same extent as it is as it used to be for these decades.
Temur, thank you for joining the Continent Podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks again to Temur for joining, and to you, dear listener. I hope you learned something with me. We've got a couple more episodes this season, so stay tuned. The Continent is a project of the Foreign Policy Research Institute, that's FPRI, a nonpartisan think tank based in Philadelphia. For more information on this initiative and on many others, visit fpri.org. We'll catch you next time.